Tim Molony. We've known each other for what, 25 years probably?
Well, I would say we started working together 2006. That's when we connected.
Is it when we connected? Okay, so it's maybe a little bit later. But we're almost 20 years. And you'll probably remember, I don't remember, was it James Covington who put us in contact with one another?
Well, James Covington, Tammy Bowling, and maybe Tom Nowakowski, Hill Country Claims. Remember that?
Oh, they were at Dash, right? Clyde Beltman.
Clyde Beltman, yes.
You want to talk about a little bit where you're at right now and explain to me, including the audience, what a claims concierge does and the company where you work and what you guys special in. I know you talked a little bit about handling high value commercial losses and uncovering fraud and that kind of thing, but you want to give a little more color there?
I started out, and I think my official title is Director of Business Development. So I bring in all the work. That's one of the primary jobs. But what I've kind of morphed into, what I've found, where I'm able to give a lot of benefit, because I have a claims background. I'm very technical, high level of knowledge and expertise on claims handling, coverage, various aspects. So when EGAs get involved in multi-million-dollar losses, it's nice and helpful for them to have somebody that's also involved in the loss. And we have a lot of subject matter experts that get involved in these losses, and the EGAs are able to use me in the sounding board. Sometimes, I've run into exactly what they need, so I can give them an answer quickly and say, well, here's the shortcut. I would suggest this. This is my experience. Others, they just want somebody that has enough knowledge to bounce things off of. So, the sounding board aspect. So I enjoy that. They also have a lot of attorneys. Frankly, I've got friends on both sides. More defense attorneys calling, hey, Tim, can you do a matter review for me? Can you, look at this and tell us, what you think, what's the value? So I've got a number of, law firms and attorneys out there that will call me to do this.
So Tim, just for some perspective, what's the average size of a loss that you guys get involved with? Is there like a minimum threshold, or do you have the data to be able to give a swag at what the average loss might be? Is it in the millions or hundreds of thousands? Or
I would say on the commercial side it's in the millions. But what I'll tell you is, so there are certain parameters that the market, and for anybody that doesn't know, the market will be the participants. When I talked about that quota share policy in the past, whoever are the group of insurers on that policy, that would be the market. And the market generally for the various MGAs, they'll set up rules of the road, and they'll say, okay, look, if you get a loss that's over 200,000, we would like for you to have a building consultant. We would like for you to have subject matter experts that can speak to. So we get.
Tim, are those rules always driven and dictated by the quota share lead, or can each participant have their own set of rules?
Well, each participant can have, if they so choose, they can choose their own experts at their expense, and that's happened on some of the, when you get into tens of millions or $100 million, you might have an expert that doesn't necessarily agree with the rest of the market, and they want to vet that with experts that they're comfortable with. So we've got, we get involved in a number of market calls where we might be on the call with other vendors that are experts, on behalf of individual participants.
So how do you guys, I'm kind of going deep in a conversation that I didn't expect to go deep, but in that scenario, you've got two vendors that are both involved on the carrier side, working and paid by related but disinterested parties. What if you guys get into a conflict? How is that resolved?
When you say disinterested parties, I mean, they're related.
Well, meaning
like they are
that,
all interested in that particular risk.
At the end of the day, they're all pro rata responsible for their percentage of participation, but they have different opinions about, causal loss coverage issues, value, yada, yada. So they bring in their own expert, whether it's an engineer or whatever. But, you know, certainly your opinions are not always going to be perfectly aligned. How are those differences reconciled?
Well, you know, it's important for them to be aligned. And when they're not aligned,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
what's one of the purposes for that market call. We need to be aligned.
I see.
And sometimes the call is, okay, we want to make sure that everybody's aligned. We want all the participants on this call so they can ask the tough questions and we can get aligned. I mean, that is the reason for the market call, so that we can be aligned truly.
Yeah, so I'll probably phrase that wrong. It's not disinterested. You're certainly aligned from an interest perspective, but different opinions, and you just have conversations, friendly conversations, until someone sways.
Yeah, there are some market calls that can be interesting because maybe they're not friendly, and you know, maybe they're not friendly. Maybe somebody is so you know, drawn a line in the sand and they truly believe that they're right and the rest of the participants are wrong. And you know, that's fun, and you need people that have the ability to steer the group back to you know, alignment. That's important. And you know, well, we've had some difficult calls, and you know, ultimately they've all resolved in a way that was amicable, but some of them getting to amicable was not the easiest route. In particular, you know, I'm thinking of one market call where, you know, we have a new expert that's been introduced, and they start saying that, well, we didn't answer this question, didn't answer that question. And this is where it got awkward, but it got us all aligned back on track, where, you know, Jared Burns, the founder of ESC, the company that I currently work for, says, well, did you read our report? Because it does answer all of his questions.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit of awkward backpedaling by the other expert, where they had to concede that, no, I didn't read the report and I missed that. But, you know, ultimately it got to where it should be, but it was an awkward route to take.
Kind of a big miss.
Kind of a big mess, but ultimately, you know, in how you handle those situations is, you know, navigating those gracefully can score you a lot of points.
Is that a role that you typically take? So you're the person who facilitates the discussions and guides that and helps the discussions stay on friendly terms?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll get involved in market calls, and normally when I'm involved, the EGA, who's the lead adjuster, you know, he'll get into it with me, or she will get into it with me on thoughts in preparation going into the market call. And then, you know, sometimes on the market call, I have that EGA. Well, we might be on the call together, but we might be texting back and forth. You know, what are you thinking? Is this, and I'm like, yep, and in the right direction, or I think you need to make this point. But you know, that's some of the fun, is pointing out where I think the group is missing something. You know, I can give some. I will occasionally talk on those calls, but I try not to, because my name is not in the file. I'm not actually handling adjuster, which what I love my position, because I get my claims fixed, but I don't have the responsibility of an inventory. So I get the best of both worlds. I get the claims fixed, but I don't, you know, I'm not generally having to worry about that responsibility.
You know, in hearing you say that, it makes me reflect on my very earliest days in claims, where I worked for the State Office of Risk Management, and we had claims council meeting every Thursday afternoon, where groups brought in claims of a certain value to a group of 8, 10, 12 people at the time. And we all looked at it from not necessarily different angles, but maybe different perspectives. And we just talked about it. And I remember, man, I was like, you know, a year out of college, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. It was a lot of fun.
When I started at State Farm, you know, we call those, you know, round tables or claim committee. And I love those. That's fascinating, because you start getting perspective And
100%.
if you think the same way all the time, and interesting, Jared Burns and I, we have a fascinating relationship because, we're both considered fairly intelligent. Maybe Jared very intelligent, but I have a different perspective, and the way that we kind of are able to work through problems, where I'm able to tell him, so the engineers are very scientific. So how they do things is, the scientific method. We need to prove this or disprove this, and they work through things very mechanically. And they try to come out with as black and white of an answer as possible. I work in a different world. I'm engaged. I've been involved in arbitrations, a lot of appraisals across the country, and I get into ADR, alternative dispute resolutions, where I'm resolving these. I'm negotiating with somebody. We've got a gray area, and we need to close this gap. And some of the things, and I believe building consultants are very important pieces when it comes to experts for the market. And the reason is because building consultants with strong construction backgrounds can say, I appreciate this engineer report. I appreciate that this is repairable, this is repairable, this is repairable. But you're not going to get a reputable contractor to affect these repairs. There's too much liability. There's too many reasons why they're not going to do that. So that building consultant takes the engineering, the black and white report, and then they go to work and say, okay, the engineer, while absolutely right. The one thing about repairability and repair methodology, which we get into as subject matter experts at BSC, is we don't touch cost. So we don't get into the estimating. So you need somebody to put that numbers lens on it to where appreciate that it's repairable, but does it make sense? So that, and that's the one thing, the one piece that's missing from, a lot of the engineering firms. Now that they still need to follow that scientific method, and they need to deliver a report that they can get up on the stand and answer the questions all day. And they need it to be as black and white as possible. But, I suggest to them, don't handcuff the adjusters. We get into this plaintiff mantra that the plaintiff gives the insurance industry, this deny, delay, and defend. And what a PLRB had me on a podcast, and they asked me my thoughts on that. And I said, well, I think it's hogwash. I said, one, I've been, like my example at Citizens, I don't want litigation. I don't have enough bandwidth as it is. And I want to speed things up. The only good claim is a closed claim. So I think that I don't necessarily agree with that deny, delay, and defend, but it has traction.
I can tell you, I 100% don't agree with it. And in my 30 years of working in the industry, I've never observed that to be a policy or position by anyone that I ever worked for or with. It logically doesn't make sense. It's a false narrative.
Yeah, it's you're creating expenses. Your loss ratios get worse. There's no upside to it, and you continue to have adjusters working the same thing over and over again. So they're less efficient. There's no real.
Yeah, I get it.
But that the one thing is, what we come out for when they say that engineers are hired guns for the industry. A lot of times on these large losses, we're coming out to give the industry, the market, the confidence to cut big checks. We're not coming back with don't pay this. Now we do have competitors in our space with a reputation of if you can figure out how to help us deny this. I mean, they have that reputation. I'm not saying that's what they do, but I hear from EGAs. Well, this group always behaves this way. I don't know that it's true. It's all third party, and I don't work for them. But we come out, if we have buckets, we have event-related conditions. We don't really get into damages because we get into conditions. So this condition is event-related. This condition is not event-related. This condition is the gray area that I get into, and the gray area is either cannot be ruled out or further investigation required. And that to me is too big of an area that needs to be closed.
So you're in New Orleans, born and raised, went to Jesuit high school,
I
No.
went to Jesuit. I was not born in Pensacola, Florida. My dad was in flight school with the
Oh,
Navy.
yeah.
So I was, so when people ask me where I'm from, I don't say New Orleans. I don't say Florida. I don't say Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, or Texas. I say the Gulf Coast because I've lived in Pensacola, Florida. That's where I was born. And we lived in Lillian, Alabama on Perdido Bay. Then we moved to, I spent some time in Jacksonville, Florida, but then we moved to Pascagoula, Mississippi, and
Yeah.
New Orleans, where I went to high school. And then I moved to Houston. So I've lived in every state on the Gulf Coast. So I'm from the Gulf Coast. That's
Your dad was a pilot?
Navy pilot. He was Navy, but after Vietnam, he decided, he had had enough of the military because that's what you do after Vietnam. You decide you've had enough of the military. But then he came back and said, you know what? He got into Louisiana National Guard. That he was a helicopter pilot at Lakefront Airport. So, and then I got pulled in to the Louisiana National Guard. I was a helicopter mechanic for 8 years.
Yeah.
And then he ended up flying for Chevron and PHI, so he was going out to all the oil rigs. And
Okay. So what year did you start Jesuit, meaning what grade?
8th grade. Well, no.
Eighth grade?
No, it was 9th grade. So I was in Pascagoula for 8th grade. I moved to New Orleans halfway. My parents, they did a handoff. They were divorced. So my mom was in Pascagoula with 4 kids, and me being, hitting 14 and being that wonderful teenage boy that she's like, nope, you need to go with your dad. You're too much to handle. So without the handoff was, made it halfway through 8th grade, then went to Jesuit 9th grade.
And then I know you spent your early days in claims at State Farm. Is that where you started and cut your teeth?
Yes. So I started with State Farm in 93, a little over 30 years ago. I was at State Farm for 10 years. So the first 2 years were auto. Then I moved into property, national catastrophe team. So I was running around the country. I was spending about 250 plus days a year on the road.
Yeah, that's a bunch.
That's a
And
bunch.
then how did you wind up at Florida Citizens?
So we get through State Farm. Then I ended up at State Farm. I bounced around quite a bit. I started 2 years auto, then Nat Cat from 95 to 99. The last couple of years, National Catastrophe Claims Team, I was a trainer, re-inspector trainer. Then I ended up getting off and State Farm started Catastrophe Claims Central, where they were handling claims virtually across the country.
So that was around the time that, and I believe it was State Farm who led the push that eventually propagated throughout the industry or property casualty side, whereby the main method of handling CAT claims was not with employees, but to outsource. And so for some perspective on that, I was a claims adjuster at the time for Worley. And Worley was one of the original 5 that got the State Farm contracts when they decided to lay off, which I believe, I remember to be 50% of their claims personnel. And it later, I think, went up from there. And in place of that, they signed contracts with 5 IA firms, one of which was Worley. And so that to me, in my opinion, began a very fundamental transition in how the entire industry operated as in regard to handling CAT claims. So where were you in that process? Did you get to the State Farm CAT team after that or during that? Were you there during
Well,
that?
I started in 95. I started with the catastrophe team, and that was field. That was 100% in the field. But then, with what State Farm recognized is there's so many smaller losses that we could handle over the phone. And so we started handling, a certain percentage over the phone. So what happened is State Farm, they would set up CAT offices everywhere. This is before Catastrophe Claim Central. So they'd have a plane. They would load a plane and they would have it in 25,000 claim blocks. So they'd have a pallet. So if it's predicted to be a 25,000 claim event, they would load it. They would go rent like an old grocery store or skating rink or something, and they would build it out, for their temporary claims office. Well, taking that pallet and loading it on a plane and setting up was, there's no reason to do it. As the technology allowed, there was no longer the need to do that. So they started saying, okay, we don't need to set up as many of these offices, and we can handle a large percentage of these claims over the phone.
So help me understand, when you say they loaded a pallet per 25,000 claims, are you talking about loading paper claims onto a pallet?
No, what I'm talking about is they built what State Farm, prior to, having the internet, they determined that we would need so many computers. If we projected there to be a 25,000 claim event, we need this much infrastructure. So they had it in, they had palletized to, I think it was 25,000 claims. So they would have all of the inventory forms, all of the graph paper, all of the Polaroid film, anything that you would need to handle a 25,000 claim event. And they would pop it on, put it on a State Farm plane, fly it to where in the middle of nowhere or somewhere USA, set it up and build out that office, and then the adjusters would show up and start handling the claims.
Yeah, almost sounds like a military protocol.
It's a logistical, it's logistical gymnastics. And, it is pretty cool when you go back and look at some of the stuff that was being done back then that we're not doing now. I mean, if you think about it, when I started out with that, they had all of this carbon paper because we hand wrote estimates 30 years ago.
Yeah. So to give you some perspective on where I was in that process, I want to say it must have been maybe 90 or maybe even a year or two earlier that Worley got the State Farm contract. And of course, I was an adjuster there. And I would say 90% of my experience and history as an adjuster had been on casualty claims. But when we got the contract, almost immediately there was a pretty large event. All of a sudden, so everybody in the company had to go through and get the 5 State Farm certifications, right? And they really had an all hands on deck approach to break into this new contract. So all of a sudden, somebody who's handled almost exclusively casualty claims, I all of a sudden got appointed to the CAT team. So that plane must have landed in Slidell, and State Farm set up an operation on the North Shore. And before I got in my car to head over to report to the CAT center, Mike Worley handed me a cassette, which, should tell everybody about, the approximate time period that was. And I said, what is this? And he said, that's a lesson on how to use this estimating program called Xactimate. And so that was my first soiree with estimating and Xactimate. So I listened to the tape on the way over there, showed up at the CAT site. I think I got maybe 25 files the first day. And, one of those claims was a 300-unit apartment complex. And so, for like a flood, that's like for an experienced CAT guy or any claims guy who's working off a fee schedule, that's like a gold mine, right? But I had no idea. It was just like another one of the 25 files. And so that was the first inspection that I did. And I showed up there, and it was a 300 unit with, I think there were 4 different floor plans, and there were 2 stories. So I know you can do the math on that and figure out how many scopes I needed to do. And essentially, once you did the scope, all you had to do was duplicate it out. But I had absolutely no idea how to do that. I never used exact analysis before. I barely even got through the scoping part of it. I knew how to take some pictures, but I didn't know how to scope it. So I actually called James Covington. I'm like, James, I said, I'm over here. I got this. Yeah, Bubba. I called Bubba, which is even scarier. But I said, hey, Bubba, I got this gig over here on the North Shore, and it's a flood loss. I'm in an apartment. There's a bunch of crap that shouldn't be here and mold and all this kind of stuff. I said, I took my pictures. I said, I really don't know what to do now. Can you come over here? Bubba was a contractor at the time. So I said, can you come over here and give me a hand and kind of help me out with how you would approach this as a contractor? And he says, I'm busy on a project right now, but I got another buddy of mine, John Knoll. And so Bubba called John, John called me, and he said, look, Thomas, I've helped Bubba a little bit, but I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll come over there and help you hold your tape measure.
Yeah.
So John showed up and he and I struggled a little bit, but eventually we got the thing, measured out and drawn up and brought it back to the CAT office. So I sat down at the computer and I was thinking about that tape and trying to, look at these scope notes and measurements and, what the hell do I do next? And I'm kind of like you. Up to that point, I had written a few estimates and it was on 3-ply paper, and you were using a paper manual to look up pricing and all that kind of stuff. And if you made one mistake, you kind of had to scrap it and start over. But some experienced flood guy showed up there and he says, man, you hit the jackpot with this. And he says, you can knock this out probably in a couple of days and make a bunch of money. So he taught me how to use the macro and Xactimate, and sure enough.
Retrieve scope. And what year was that?
I want to say that was 91.
Okay, so that's
19,
still MS-DOS. And I don't even know that Xactimate had sketches that time, which made your job easier.
It made your job easier. No, it was pencil and paper for sketching. So yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that I want to talk to you about today is, the just complete transformation of the way that we process claims back then in basically a paper environment with a little bit of technology. We didn't even have the point and click measuring the dista.
Oh, we had tape measures. Yeah. So if
we had tape measures
with cat
Polaroid cameras, you had to print out the pictures and staple them to the picture sheet and label those. So yeah, it was very manual.
Before you get to use Xactimate back then, we didn't even have GPS. We didn't have mapping programs. So I worked in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 94 or January 96. And it was cold and there's mountains. So when you look at a Rand McNally map, which is really all I had, I'm like, okay. I plotted exactly what I was going to do that day. And then I found out coming from, I guess we're flatlanders, so we're used to everything being. But then when it's like this, and the next thing you know, you're driving along thinking you're just going to get right here, and then you hit the inside of a mountain. Oh shoot, this isn't as easy as I thought. So getting around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, without a GPS and without one of these mapping systems was fun. It's comical. If we could have had a camera following me back then, there people would have been doubled over laughing. I got a ticket on the way to a claim because I passed the exit, and it's painful. If you miss your exit in Pittsburgh, you go for a few miles and then you're stuck in traffic. And I end up getting there half an hour late. So I tell the homeowner, I said, I'm sorry, this is what happened. I ended up getting a ticket. And he said, give me that ticket. He grabbed that ticket and he said, let me handle this for you.
Really? Well, that's cool.
Yeah. So anyway, I had to fly back. I had a court date for that ticket, but he ended up, the homeowner, which, we got to be careful what we share here, but I guess State Farm's not going to come after me for some, hey, look,
statute of limitations, baby.
Yeah. Thank God. It's kind of like today's technology with these smartphones and people recording everything everywhere. But the point is, before we even got to where we could use Xactimate on these estimates, we had to get there, and there wasn't. You either had a key map, you had a Rand McNally, you had, especially when you're not in your home city, you had to learn a lot about how to get around.
Yeah. So that I've got two boys. One is 23 and the other's 18, and neither one of them can get from our house to probably their school or to this office. My older son works for me now. But they use their GPS to go absolutely everywhere. They're going to get something to eat, they plug in the GPS address. Go in a friend's house, plug it in a GPS address, and they could go there 10 times or 100 times, and they still go and use the Google Map thing when they're going anywhere. It's really weird.
Well, let me stop that, because I think that is a perfect segue into what we used to have to do in claims. We had to research the material price. We had to figure out what the labor price in the area was. And we use time and materials to build these estimates. Adjusters today are like your kids. Everything is automated. So when the system breaks,
you broke the machine.
Keep the change.
Yeah, keep the change.
Keep the change.
We're on a good topic here because where I wanted to go with this is, where we were back in the day, which, we've established is, early to mid 90s. And of course, we're in 2024 now. So, almost 30 years ago, and technology has fundamentally changed like everything that adjusters do. And I haven't handled a claim in 25 years. So I'm not as intimate with the tools of the trade today. But, obviously I'm a claims tech provider. So I know the claims management side of it really well. But the tools that the field guys use, not so much. But the bigger picture to me, I keep looking back at where we are as an industry and hearing about the lawsuits, the complaints, the underpaid claims, the delayed response, the hold times on FNOL, the general the NPS rating of the industry in general, and I just go, are we any better than we were 30 years ago? And honestly, I don't know that we are. And I gauge that solely, this is my opinion, by the NPS, that, if the insured is not more satisfied today than they were 30 years ago, then we're not better. We might think we're better and we do things differently and maybe we feel more efficient, but at the end of the day, if the homeowner's not more satisfied and happy, and I think the NPS scores reflect that, then, what's it all for?
I'll say I've got a little bit of an issue with that because I think we've gotten more and more spoiled with technology. So our expectations are higher and higher.
Yeah.
When I get on my phone, I need things immediately.
Yeah.
Where it used to be, you couldn't even get me on a cell phone. When I started in catastrophe operations, I didn't even have a cell phone. So that, I was calling people at their homes, and if I didn't get them, I'd leave a message if they had voice. There's a lot of people that didn't even have answering machines.
So that's a good point. And that is one of the things that I asked about, and it's the Amazon effect. And Amazon has done a remarkable job of simplifying and bringing ease to everything that we order, right? Anything that you want to procure, boom, you click a couple of buttons. You don't even have to enter a credit card, and it's at your door the next day or 2 days later or whatever. And if you don't like it, you send it back, and it's just a beautiful experience. So I think you're absolutely right that consumer expectations have changed, and people look at, the process of both procuring insurance and having claims handled, and we're just not there yet. So I would say that's a relative perspective. I would like to go back and look at this as what I call an absolute perspective. And to look at it that way, you have to ask, have the fundamental measurables improved? And I would call that cycle times, right? So
right.
Have we reduced the wait times for a person to report a claim, and particularly in a CAT event when it's, really pressure tested? Have we reduced the time that it takes to assign a claim to the adjuster? Have we reduced the time that it takes the adjuster to make the initial contact? Have we reduced the time that it takes to schedule the appointment, to do the scope, to create the estimate? And then I know, and I don't know if you know this, but I know this by being, privy to the data that I'm privy to. One of the surprising things to me is it's really not the field adjuster cycle times that we're struggling with. It's the time that elapses between the estimate and the field adjuster report being submitted to the time that it gets reviewed. And I'm speaking specifically on the IA side. That that
now
takes...
Okay, help me out. So when you say review, from the IA, the adjuster to the IA firm, or to the client.
Precisely correct. The internal QA review by the IA is taken. The field adjuster turn it in, and 14 days later it hasn't even come up for file review. And so my carrier clients tell me they don't understand why that part of the process is taking so long. And I have personal opinions about it. Some of that is being automated and computerized now. But I think there's a tremendous amount of improvement that needs to be had. And at the end of the day, you know, the industry or the carrier looks at the field guy because the entire cycle, the life cycle of the claim is expanded by the various hops in the process, and the field guy has zero control over how long it takes to get a file reviewed.
But let me speak to my opinion on that, if you will.
Yeah, please.
The point is, back in the mid 90s through the early 2000s, you know, the fee schedules were, you know, you could make a good living as an independent adjuster.
Yes.
And you also had the insurance industry paying for like team leads to the IA firm.
Tim, let me press you a little bit there. What do you mean by you can make a good living?
So
I've never done it, but the numbers that I was told by some of the guys that I knew that, you know, were first to be deployed and last to leave on a big event, you know, and if they weren't making $3,000 a day, it was not a good day.
Yeah.
And I would venture to say that there's very few people that even come anywhere close to that, you know, today. And so
Yeah,
with that said,
you
know, continue with your points.
Yeah. So the point is, not only was the carrier that the fee schedules were better for the adjusters, they didn't do as much. You know, they actually have more to do today. They're getting in systems, they're updating this, they're updating that, and the fee schedules are lower. The IA firms had team leads that were paid for by the carriers. They're not necessarily having anymore. So when you're taking your money out of the IA firm is running the company on the percentage that they get from the IA firms, to have another file reviewer is something that they weigh. So the cycle times are increasing because there's fewer file reviewers, because it used to be you'd have a ratio, maybe 1-5, 1-10, where the insurance company is going to pay you for that. And they're not paying a lot of IA firms for that cost. So the IA firms aren't doing it. And if you want it, the other issue is you have file reviewers, you know, that are good and fastidious. You know, they're going to make sure everything is done right. And the other issue is the people. So the people, no matter how good the technology is, you still rely on the people to do their job. And even if you have the best technology, but the people aren't doing their job efficiently, you still are going to have a cycle time issue. And I think that the industry of qualified, seasoned, experienced people has contracted because it's no longer the attractive place for people to play in. And I say this, you know, and this will get shared, and this, you know, some people might be upset about it, but it's true. And then we have the issues that we have, the current lay of the land, where all the litigation and you know, and the plaintiff attorneys are pretty good at pointing out the shortcomings of the insurance industry.
Yeah. And it's sort of a domino effect, or, you know, sinkhole, if you will, that, you know, you pull one of the plugs and the water starts going out, and then it just compounds itself. And I think fundamentally, you just hit the head on, you know, the biggest lever that's pointed in the wrong direction. And, you know, that is the diminishment of quality adjusters and the exit of the, you know, the old guard, as they say. And it's mainly because of the fact that the money isn't there anymore. And there's a number of reasons behind that. I'm a little bit surprised, or maybe not surprised, but curious to hear you, and probably disappointed somewhat to hear you say that the workload of the adjuster is even greater now than it was then, because my philosophy is let the machine do everything that you can, including automate so many of the activities. And I personally think, and I'm obviously biased in what our software does, and we do everything possible to take the administrative duties off of the adjuster so he can focus in using his skill set in the field, which is to scope and adjust. And I think what you're saying is, you know, even though that those capabilities might exist, they're not the norm. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, let me tell you that I believe that, one, I give the plaintiff bar a lot of credit. And when I talk about the plaintiff bar, the plaintiff attorneys, the plaintiff bar, I give them a lot of credit. They're proactive. They look for the weak spot in the insurance industry, and they attack it and they're good at it. And I'll give an example. In 2008, Hurricane Ike, Steve Mostyn, had a class action lawsuit against TWIA, $190 million and won. And I have the what was and the what is, and I have the what could be, but I'll leave that because that's a project that I'm working on. But the what was, when I started 30 years ago, is an adjuster would go out, look at damages. Hey, Mr. Homeowner, anything else that I might have missed? No. Okay, you focus on the damages, you write the check, and you're done. So then Steve Mostyn and a number of these plaintiff attorneys said, look, the insurance company's not doing a complete investigation. They're not walking in this attic. They're not going to the end, and we can attack that. So, so they did. And I got sued over, roughly 500 times by the Mostyn law firm. And the way that the insurance, and that's
Jim, where were you then? Was that
Nomad?
The IA? Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. I think I remember that flurry of litigation.
Yeah. So I got one day, it got to the point to where the process servers had my name on speed dial. Hey, Tim, where are you? Can I come meet you? Yeah, I was in the movies one day. I'll be in the parking lot. Can you come meet me then? One day
you were getting served 5 at a time.
One day, 77 was the most I got served at once by the Mostyn law firm. And I will tell you, this is where E&O, this is another squeeze on the IA firms. So the IA firms, not only, so when you start out, you're looking at damages and you're focused on damages. You're not documenting the room that they didn't show you. You're not documenting the attic. But then what happened is, okay, we're going to the industry, shrinks the fee schedule, but they tell the adjuster, now you have to look at everything. We're going to pay you less, but you have to look at every room. We don't care if there's damage. We don't care if you don't find any damage to the exterior of that building. We know this is going to go to litigation. So you've got to look at, so what the improvement, I think it was an improvement, but I don't think that the adjusters have been compensated for more thorough investigation. And that's the what was to the what is.
Well,
the what is,
by design, the fee schedule is designed to do just the opposite. It doesn't pay you by what you look at, it pays you by what you pay for.
Right.
So, if you're spending twice as much time to inspect twice as much area and only half of it's damaged, you don't make any more money.
In the residential personal line space, yes. A lot of the commercial is T&E, and for that reason, for detailed inspections and investigation, the EGAs do a better job because they get paid. They're incentivized to make sure that they look at it and consider everything.
Yeah, it's an important distinction, and I think my natural go-to when I discuss any of these things is residential property.
And when we talk about these high TIV structures, and you and I have had some conversation on this, my what was damages to what is focused on documenting everything and framing it in time post-loss. The next iteration on the high TIV, I think, should be a baseline established ahead of the loss. And we're not doing that right now. We have the technology to do it. It's being done in the oil and gas industry. You and I have a friend in common, Joe Brenz, and he does an exceptional job having everything available for anybody that wants to see it at any time. And right now, the digital twin. And, the conversations that I've had with Joe, we've improved upon the digital twin concept to the point to where we have an intelligent digital twin.